The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Again, Jesus left the district of Tyre and went by way of Sidon to the Sea of Galilee, into the district of the Decapolis. And people brought to him a deaf man who had a speech impediment, and begged him to lay his hand on him. He took him off by himself, away from the crowd. He put his finger into the man's ears, and spitting, touched his tongue. Then he looked up to heaven and groaned, and said to him, Ephphatha, that is, be opened. And immediately the man's ears were opened. His speech impediment was removed, and he spoke plainly. He ordered them not to tell anyone, but the more he ordered them not to, the more they proclaimed it. They were exceedingly astonished, and they said, He has done all things well. He makes the deaf hear and the mute speak. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. Speak or hear. I get it mixed up sometimes. There are a lot of healings. And he uses the word Ephphatha. And there's a wonderful parallel to this gospel. And it's in the gospel according to the movie Ben-Hur. In that movie, Judah Ben-Hur, who was a prince of Israel, was taken away from his family and made a slave, wrongly. And he returned eventually to his family. He was released and was able to get to his house, which had been boarded up. And there he ran into his father's faithful servant, Judah, who had stayed that entire time. But he too had been arrested for a short time. And during that time had been beaten and had become crippled. And he was there with another man, a large man named Malchus. And Malchus had also been imprisoned at the same time and had been tortured and had had his tongue cut out. So Judah could not walk and Malchus could not speak. And Judah told Ben-Hur that Malchus are my legs and I am his voice. And together they were able to speak and to walk. And in a real way, God has made himself equally vulnerable, at times almost helpless, in order to have us each share in his mission. I never realize this more than when I am going to somebody who's homebound, or in a nursing home, or in a hospital, because in those times, I'm going to a person who can't come to Christ in the church building, and I am trusted to be Christ's hands, his feet, his comforting voice, because Christ wants to go to them. However, he's trusted me in that way, knowing that I will not carry out his work perfectly, but that by making me part of his mission, he not only gives grace to the person receiving him, but to the person bringing him as well. And this is not just limited to ministerial priests. When a Eucharistic minister goes among the people with the Eucharist, he or she is being Christ's feet, his healing presence. When we are kind to a coworker at work, or to somebody in our own home, one of our own family members, we are being Christ to that person, his voice and his presence. When we share our relationship with Jesus with others, we are spreading his message for him. And this is how we do it, just not as ourselves, but as Christ. How is that possible? The answer is in the gospel. This healing is one that Christ wants to draw our attention to in a special way. And how do we know that? Jesus does not just do the healing the way he did so many other times in the gospel, by letting his shadow pass across the person, or by simply touching their head, or having them touch the tassel of his robe. No, he makes a point of taking this man apart, drawing attention to the healing. And the way he does it is dramatic, almost theatrical. He touches the man's ears, touches his tongue, and cries out, "Ephphatha," which means to be opened. And in this way, he made it a separate and important healing, and the church took notice. Because in the rite of baptism, the initiate, after he or she has been baptized and anointed priest, prophet, and king like Christ, the priest touches the baby's or the adult's mouth and ears and tells them in a prayer to be opened in the model of Christ. And this moment in the baptismal rite is appropriately called the Ephphatha. And in doing so, he repeats that action of Christ for each of the baptized. Now, ironically enough, when we have an infant being baptized, we're actually praying that he or she does not open the mouth or indeed even the eyes. But that's beside the point. Eventually they grow into that, and they too can be Christ to others. And that was how it was at each of our baptisms. That was the beginning of our mission. And that mission is nothing less than to be the ears that hear what God is asking us to do, and then we are to be his voice. A voice to speak words of comfort to the suffering. A voice to bring admonition to the sinner. A voice to call for justice for the downtrodden. But of course, we don't simply know how to be the voice of somebody that we don't know. We must take time to get to know Christ before we can speak in his voice. And how do we do this? By taking time away from the noise of the world, especially from the many electronic distractions that are around us all the time. We have to take that time to read God's word, speaking to him in prayer, and preparing to spread that message abroad to others. To be Christ's voice to others. Does it seem daunting to be the voice of God? Are you afraid of taking on the mission? Well, that's all right, because so were the Israelites in Isaiah in the first reading today. And what did God say to them? Be strong, fear not. Here is your God. He comes with vindication and divine recompense. And so we must not be afraid to speak for God. In a special way, I'd encourage you to be the voice of God to those children of God who are the most voiceless, for the stranger among us and the prisoner, for the aged and the sick, and for our most vulnerable and the unborn, those who have not even had the opportunity to be baptized and told Ephphatha. And on this topic, you may have seen a recent papal letter related to the issue of abortion. It has been in the news, and just recently, reporter John Muir was reporting that for the first time, any priest can forgive those who have procured or participated in an abortion. Well, this isn't exactly right. People are confused. Any priest has always been able to forgive the sin of abortion. Occasionally, the seriousness of the sin leads to the censure of excommunication, the lifting of which was reserved to the bishop. However, in practically every diocese in the United States, the bishop has delegated this authority to the individual priest. Pope Francis was simply making the delegation universal. So if you were forgiven of this sin in confession, rest assured that God's mercy continues to endure in your life. And here in this issue, too, we have a perfect example of another important aspect of being the voice of God, the voice employed in this ministry. Jesus had many voices. He was caring and kind, but he could also be strong and decisive. And so we have to know when to use each voice. To the mothers who are often almost forced by circumstances or other people to turn to abortion, we must use the tone of mercy and forgiveness that Pope Francis has time and again channeled, especially most recently in this difficult issue. But there is a different tone for the many wolves in our government who deny basic protections to the unborn, continue to use our money to fund their killers, and then dare to call themselves practicing Catholics. We must, like Christ in those times, cry out for the injustice served by these, at best, terribly misguided Christians. And so, today, Christ presents you with a mission, and he asks you, will you be my voice? To comfort the lonely, to admonish the sinner, to protect the vulnerable. Essentially, to do what we are asked to do in the spiritual and the corporal works of mercy. If so, then we will not simply be Christians in name only, but we will be true apostles, those sent to be Christ to others, to the ends of the earth, and right in our very own homes. We will go forth, following that command of Christ himself. Ephphatha, be opened.